2026 is genuinely packed with strong single-player releases, and some of them have already made a lot of noise, like Resident Evil Requiem and Crimson Desert. But instead of going in circles over the same names again, let's get into 20 of the biggest new single-player games still coming before the end of the year, because there is definitely a lot here worth keeping an eye on. What's up, guys? It's Broz, and here we go. Phantom Blade Zero already has the kind of momentum most new action games would kill for. S-Game opened wishlist pages in mid-December, and the game cleared 1 million wishlists in just 15 days, with the studio later saying more than half of them came from outside China. You play as an assassin who was framed for killing his master, and he only has 66 days left to live. The game pushes a fast martial arts style built around more than 30 weapons and over 20 special weapon arts, with bosses dropping signature weapons and techniques you can add to your own arsenal. S-Game keeps calling the style Kung Fu Punk, and the look mixes old-school wuxia, machinery, smoke, and Hong Kong action film choreography. The devs have also backed away from the Souls-like label. The studio describes it as a semi-open world action RPG with difficulty options, and in January the team canceled a planned spring trailer so resources could stay on content completion, debugging, and polishing for launch. It is also built with motion capture and fight choreography pulled from martial arts performers, so even regular strings carry that heavy cinema rhythm instead of standard fantasy slashing from start to finish on screen. Phantom Blade Zero is set to launch on PS5 on September 9th. Fable is in a pretty unusual spot right now because Playground is taking one of Xbox's most recognizable RPG series and rebuilding it as a fresh start instead of dragging the old timeline forward. Albion is still the setting, the British humor is still there, and the official wording keeps pushing a world where reputation matters. Fairy tale endings are never guaranteed, and even small choices can snowball into something bigger. Playground has already said that tiny actions can turn into stories people remember, judge, and gossip about, which sounds much closer to classic Fable than a lot of people expected when the studio first took over. Chickens are still part of the chaos, but the bigger hook is that moral choices are being handled in a grayer way now, with reputation changing how people react depending on where you are and what they know about you. Playground built its name on Forza Horizon, so this is a big jump from racing into a fully open world action RPG. The world is also sounding much denser than some expected, with over 1,000 handcrafted NPCs and systems around relationships, property, and long-form social interaction inside Albion. Fable is set to launch on PS5 in autumn 2026. Halo on PlayStation still sounds surreal, but Campaign Evolved is not a small port or some light remaster. Halo Studios is rebuilding the original Combat Evolved campaign from the ground up and folding in new missions, expanded gameplay, and a much bigger co-op package for the first game. The campaign itself is still the Ringworld story that defined the series, but the studio is treating this as a broader retelling instead of a museum piece. They have already shown the Silent Cartographer in a pre-release build, and the official wording keeps pushing gameplay enhancements and an expanded narrative rather than just visual upgrades. That matters since Halo has lived on reissues for years, and this is the first one that sounds like it is actually trying to add new weight to Combat Evolved instead of just preserving it. PS5 gets 2-player split screen, console and PC players can squad up online in 4-player co-op, and the whole thing supports cross-platform progression. For a game tied so closely to Xbox history, that shift is probably the biggest headline around it. Lords of the Fallen 2 is not pretending the first game launched in perfect shape. CI Games is openly building the sequel on top of version 2.0, and the mountain of post-launch fixes that followed the 2023 release. More than 50 updates went into getting that first game where the community wanted it, and now the sequel is being sold as the result of all those lessons. The setting jumps a full century after the original, with the Umbral disaster still spreading, and the line between the living world and the dead looking even thinner than before. Now that the lamp is back, the whole two-realm structure stays in place, and the sequel is also adding new darker powers tied to Umbral itself. The official pitch now talks about faster, more decisive fights, tighter risk-reward flow between strikes, dodges, and counters, and a new set of executions built to make the violence hit harder. So this is clearly not being framed as a huge reinvention. It looks more like a sequel trying to finally cash in on everything the first one learned the hard way. 007 First Light is doing something smart by starting Bond before he becomes the polished version everyone already knows. No tuxedo legend yet, no full myth in place, just a younger Bond at the start of his path, with M spotting the potential before the number is earned. IO is using that angle to build an origin story instead of doing a greatest hits Bond simulator. The gameplay side already looks very IO interactive in the right ways. Their main idea is that objectives can be handled through what they call a creative approach, which basically means stealth, improvisation, gadgets, bluffing, eavesdropping, melee, gunplay, or a mix of all of it depending on the situation. There's a strong Hitman flavor in that structure, but with more driving, more direct action, and a much heavier cinematic Bond layer over the top. Bond is paired against Greenway, a former 00 agent who trains the revived program and clashes hard with Bond's improvisational style, while the global chase runs through places like the Carpathians and the black market city of Aleph. Lenny Kravitz is also in as Balma, which is one of the stranger casting details around the project. 007 First Light releases on PlayStation 5 on May 27th. Insomniac is clearly not softening Wolverine to make him fit a safer superhero mold. The latest official material leans hard into dismemberment, berserker rage, and the idea that Logan fights like a living weapon who keeps moving through pain instead of avoiding it. That alone already separates the game from the studio's Spider-Man rhythm. Logan tears through enemies with fast close-range attacks, can disarm people, throw them into walls or over railings, and builds momentum through rage. The footage and the official wording both push the same image over and over again. This is a version of Wolverine built for dirty proximity, not distance. Locations already confirmed for the story push the same idea too, from Madripoor to Canada to Tokyo. Liam McIntyre is playing Logan. Mystique and Omega Red are already confirmed in the orbit of the story, and the Reavers are one of the enemy factions trying to stop him. The setup around Logan himself is also darker than a lot of people expected, with the story digging into a past he cannot fully piece together, and a version of the character that sounds more raw than charming. You'll be able to play this PS5 exclusive on September 15th. The Blood of Dawnwalker is carrying a lot of curiosity already, partly because Rebel Wolves is opening with a very different kind of fantasy pitch. This is a dark fantasy RPG where time itself keeps moving forward, your family's days are numbered, and every quest or delay pushes the world closer to an ending. Cohen, the main character, moves through two separate gameplay loops depending on whether it is day or night, and the same situation can play out in totally different ways depending on when you arrive. The official examples already show that clearly, including one sequence where the same hidden crypt leads to a completely different encounter depending on the time of day. There is also no single main route being forced on the player. Rebel Wolves keeps pushing the idea of a narrative sandbox, with revenge, family, alliances, preparation, and missed chances all feeding back into the world. The studio is also fronted by developers with deep Witcher and cyberpunk history, which is one reason people are watching this so closely in the first place. The most interesting thing about Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis is that Crystal Dynamics is not just remastering the 1996 game and calling it a day. The official reveal frames it as a true reimagining of Lara's debut, and the wording matters. This is still the Scion hunt across Peru, Greece, Egypt, and a Mediterranean island, but it is being rebuilt with modern design, new surprises, and a much bigger presentation push for Tomb Raider's 30th anniversary. It already gives the project a different angle from simple nostalgia bait. The appeal of the first Tomb Raider was never just that it was old. It was the acrobatics, the isolated tomb spaces, the puzzle rooms, the weird danger, and the sense that Lara was always one bad move away from getting crushed, impaled, or mauled. The new pitch keeps all of that in focus while also promising a more confident and modern take on Lara, again voiced by Alex Wilton Regan. Crystal Dynamics is developing this with Flying Wild Hog, an unusual pairing on paper, and as a result, the project has more intrigue than a straight internal remake on its own. Control Resonant is one of the stranger sequels of 2026, and not just because Remedy moved the story out of the oldest house and into a collapsing Manhattan. The bigger shift is in how the whole game plays. This time, Dylan Faden takes center stage. City layout is built around handcrafted zones instead of one giant grindy map, and combat swings much harder toward close-range aggression than Control ever did. Dylan carries a shape-shifting melee weapon that can swap forms inside the same build, and the loop is built around pressure. Hits refill ability resources, powers open enemies up, executions boost melee damage, and the whole fight starts snowballing once you stay on top of it. At the same time, Remedy is also leaving room for ranged or more tactical setups, including summon abilities and other build combinations, so it is not being flattened into one single approach. Outside combat, the structure sounds tighter than a lot of modern action RPGs. Remedy is openly saying it does not want a giant map full of filler, and the city is packed with main missions, self-contained world quests, optional events, hidden discoveries, and seamless dialogue during exploration. Silent Hill Townfall is finally showing what it actually is, and the biggest surprise is that Screenburn did not go for the usual third-person format. The game is first-person, and that change is tied directly to how the whole horror loop works. A pocket CRT television replaces the classic radio and becomes both a threat detector and a story device, letting the player scan through the environment, find nearby threats, and pick up disturbing signals from around the town. It can expose shapes through walls, help with puzzles, and guide progress through certain encounters. That fits the studio's old obsession with retro interfaces and VHS aesthetics, and it gives Townfall a much stronger identity than if it had just copied familiar Silent Hill tools one for one. Combat also sounds uglier and more nervous than heroic. There are melee and ranged weapons, but the official details make it clear that fighting is often the wrong answer. The game is built around stealth, peeking, hiding, distractions, and enemies that dynamically hunt the player if too much attention is drawn. Together, those details make the whole thing feel more hunted than the average horror game where monsters mostly wait for their turn. Saros is already giving off a very different energy from Returnal. Even though the Housemarque DNA is obvious the second combat starts, the latest hands-on reports describe shorter runs built around roughly half-hour bursts, with the idea that the game should stay tense without turning into a marathon every time you sit down. Even though death still matters, the game keeps giving you more control over how future runs unfold through permanent progression, difficulty tuning, and movement across opened-up parts of the map. Housemarque is still filling the screen with hostile patterns, corrupted enemies, and high-speed pressure. This time the story follows Arjun Devraj on Carcosa, a new nightmare planet where the whole combat setup looks built around aggression. Early impressions keep pointing to bullet absorption, shield timing, corruption mechanics, and enemy designs that reward pushing into danger instead of waiting for perfect windows. Saros sounds less defensive than Returnal, and probably more immediately readable for players who bounced off that older loop. And you'll be able to play this PS5 exclusive starting April 30th. Mortal Shell 2 is going wider without losing the ugly, heavy feel that made the first game stand out. Cold Symmetry is calling it a standalone sequel, so it is not one of those follow-ups where you need to remember every detail from the last game to get going. This time, the studio is pushing a compact open world with freer exploration, hidden structures, and twisted side spaces in place of a more boxed-in path from fight to fight. The body-swapping idea is still there, and it is still the main identity of the series. Fallen warriors are scattered across the world, and stepping into them unlocks their built-in abilities and learned skills. That means your style can shift hard depending on which shell you take over. And the sequel is also putting more weight on weapon upgrades and harsher combat speed. The official description keeps stressing that the fights are faster, more violent, and much less restrained. Cold Symmetry is also talking a lot about density instead of size. The map is being built as one connected space full of hidden routes, side areas, and things you can miss if you rush, so the sequel sounds less like a giant open world and more like a compact hostile place with a lot packed into it. Pragmata got one of the more surprising moves of the spring when Capcom pulled the release forward by a week and then followed it with a long hands-on blowout that finally made the combat loop easy to understand. The whole fight structure depends on Hugh and Diana working together. Hugh handles movement, aiming, and firepower, while Diana cracks enemy armor through a live hacking grid that appears right in the middle of combat. Until that hack lands, a lot of machines barely care about your bullets. That is where the game gets more interesting than a normal sci-fi shooter. You are tracing paths, opening armor, hitting weak states, then cashing in with gunfire and follow-up melee before the next wave closes in. The recent hands-on also confirmed things like critical knockdowns, loadout upgrades, resource management, and node effects that can change damage or extend how long enemies stay vulnerable. The lunar station and the hostile AI are still the backbone of the setting, but now the game finally feels readable, after all the delays and years of vague marketing. Capcom at least showed enough of the real loop to make it clear what you are doing from one fight to the next. Pragmata releases on PS5 on April 17th. Onimusha Way of the Sword already has one thing working in its favor before the rest of the details even land. It does not look watered down. Capcom is bringing the series back after a very long gap, and leaning into blood, steel, demons, and a version of Kyoto twisted by malice. The protagonist is Miyamoto Musashi, and Capcom is modeling him after Toshiro Mifune, which immediately gives the whole game a very specific old cinema edge. Musashi carries the Oni Gauntlet, cuts through Genma, parries, deflects projectiles, and fights through stages built around close pressure instead of flashy crowd-clearing nonsense. The devs keep stressing intense swordplay, and the older Onimusha identity seems intact, but the footage also shows heavier physicality in the strikes and a more grounded body language than a lot of modern action games. Capcom also tied the game to real Kyoto landmarks and placed the story in the early Edo period. Kiyomizu-dera is already part of the setting, and that gives the world a stronger shape from the start. As Musashi moves deeper through the city, the historical side of Kyoto keeps colliding with demon corruption, cursed spaces, and all the supernatural chaos hanging over the story. Gothic 1 Remake is taking on a tougher job than most remakes, because the original was never known for being polished. People remember it for the rough colony atmosphere, the faction tension, the rude social ladder, and the feeling that the Valley of Mines did not care whether you survived or not. Alchemia seems to understand that, and the recent materials keep stressing a living world that reacts to what you do instead of just dressing the old game in newer visuals. The first practical sign of that came with Naira's prologue, which let players step into the colony early and get a look at how the remake handles daily routines, camp structure, and the density of the world. The latest making of also keeps underlining the dynamic ecosystem, NPC behavior, and creature routines, which is exactly the part that needed protecting. There is also the old audience hanging over this remake the whole time. One side wants the colony to stay rude, unfair, and hostile like it was before, and the other side is meeting Gothic for the first time through modern controls and modern visuals. You'll be able to jump into Gothic 1 Remake on June 5th. Directive 8020 is moving the dark pictures into a much meaner space than the older entries. The crew of the Cassiopeia is trapped with an alien organism that can perfectly imitate humans, so the usual who is going to die next tension now gets mixed with active paranoia and direct survival horror. Supermassive is not leaning only on dialogue choices this time. The official details keep stressing real-time threats, live chases, stealth, and tools that matter in the moment. The new Turning Points feature is probably the biggest system change the anthology has seen. It lets players jump back to earlier decision moments and change the branch instead of replaying the whole thing blind from the start. On top of that, the crew now uses gear like scanners, remote hacking tools, and wedge tools while trying to identify imposters and stay alive. Scanners can expose hidden movement, remote tools let you work with ship systems from safer angles, and wedge tools can block routes or buy a few extra seconds when something gets too close. Once the alien starts moving through the Cassiopeia, all of that becomes part of the core loop alongside the branching scenes and decisions. PS5 gets Directive 8020 on May 12th. Beast of Reincarnation is one of the stranger PS5 action RPGs on the calendar. For one simple reason, it is Game Freak going hard outside Pokemon. The game is set in a ruined future Japan, and puts almost all of its identity into the bond between Emma and her dog Ku. The official line calls it a one-person, one-dog action RPG, and that is not just branding language. Emma handles the close-range sword work in real time, while Ku operates through command-driven skills that can be triggered during combat, parrying as Emma earns the points needed to unleash Ku's techniques, so the game keeps pulling you between technical timing and quick tactical choices. There is also a darker story hook around Emma herself. She is feared as an outcast, she has lost her memories and emotions, and the job she carries is brutal. Every time she hunts down one of these corrupted creatures, she seals its blight inside her own body. Ku is part of that same cursed side of the world, so their bond is tied to the disease tearing Japan apart. Beast of Reincarnation hits PS5 on August 4th. Ace Combat 8 is finally taking the series back into numbered territory after a very long gap, and the setup already feels more desperate than the last game. The story opens with the pilot drifting at sea in a rescue boat, before being pulled aboard an outdated carrier called Endurance. The Federation of Central Usia has already collapsed under invasion. The Navy is shattered, and the carrier is packed with refugees. Bandai Namco is also pushing a few details harder than usual for this series. The campaign is being framed around dynamic multi-layered cloudscapes, heavier mission drama, difficult choices and relationships inside the squad, instead of just one spectacle mission after another. The official site keeps repeating the phrase, "living skies," which at least suggests Project Aces is putting more weight on atmosphere and battlefield mood. The campaign is also spending more time on the pilot outside the cockpit than the series usually does. Between sorties, the story drops into first-person scenes on the carrier and around the crew, with more focus on command pressure, squad relationships, and the state of a military that is already halfway broken before the war even settles. Resonance is going in a direction that makes immediate sense for this universe, without just dragging Onimusha and Hugo back onto the stage again. The game moves 15 years before Requiem and follows Sophia, which already changes the tone. Instead of another direct continuation of the sibling story, Asobo is using a character people already know and dropping her into something harsher, more physical, and much more tied to myth. The new setting is Minotaur Island, and the official descriptions are full of treacherous trails, puzzle solving, combat, and an army hunting Sophia while she digs into her own past. There is still danger, still pursuit, still that heavy pressure around survival, but this time it is running through ruins, legends, and a buried curse instead of the familiar brother-sister tragedy. Sophia was one of the easiest characters to spin off into a separate game, since she already had the smuggler edge, the right instincts, and enough mystery around her past. Minotaur Island already makes it feel like its own branch, with old ruins, soldiers on her back, and mythology pushing into the Plague World instead of leftover material from the older games. The newest real update on GTA 6 is not a trailer or another leak. It is Rockstar and Take-Two locking the date again and quietly moving the launch into its next phase. Rockstar still has the game set for November 19, 2026, and Take-Two told investors in early February that the marketing campaign is scheduled to begin this summer. After how long this project has been sitting under a microscope, that is the first genuinely fresh public signal in a while. There is probably no point going over the story and gameplay here, since you already know all that. The more interesting part now is the money around it. Take-Two already raised its fiscal 2026 bookings forecast to nearly $6.7 billion, with GTA sitting at the center of that jump. And Reuters reported that analysts expect the game to pull in billions within its first weeks. That expectation is coming off real history, too. GTA 5 opened at $800 million in one day and crossed $1 billion in 3 days, which turned it into the fastest entertainment release to ever hit that mark at the time. Right now, GTA 6 is already being treated as the title that can move a publisher's entire fiscal year, dominate holiday spending, and take over the industry the second the real marketing push starts. Aphelion is a sci-fi survival adventure set on the frozen planet Persephone, where the story moves between two astronauts, Ariane and Thomas, after their mission collapses. Their parts of the game are built differently. Ariane gets the harsher traversal, stealth, and survival pressure, while Thomas handles more of the investigation side, dealing with the planet's strange anomalies and trying to reconnect with her. Working with the European Space Agency gives this project a much stronger identity than most games in the same lane. Mission design, equipment, and the science behind the setup were shaped with ESA input. So even before the stranger side of the planet starts taking over, everything already feels more grounded than the usual cinematic sci-fi adventure. Exploration, traversal, and stealth clearly matter here more than straight combat. A lot of the tension also comes from Ariane and Thomas being separated for so long. As contact breaks down and the distance between them keeps growing, the story takes on a much more personal kind of pressure, as both of them slip deeper into something they still cannot fully read. The game lands on PS5 on April 28th. Kena Scars of Kosmora is not going back to the same kind of journey as Bridge of Spirits and calling it a sequel. Ember Lab is pushing Kena onto a new island tied directly to her own past, and that changes the center of the story right away. Instead of only helping other spirits move on, she is also digging into an older and more dangerous form of spirit, guiding connected to elemental power. The new Spirit Companions are the most interesting additions so far. Their powers are tied to different elements, grow over time, and play a role in combat, puzzle solving, and traversal. This gives the sequel a broader toolset than the first game, where the Rot had a very strong identity but a narrower role in how the world opened up. Ember Lab is also directly saying this sequel expands the action and combat. A lot of eyes are on the follow-up for a very simple reason. The first Kena fooled plenty of people with its Pixar-like look, then hit them with bosses that were way nastier than expected. That reputation is already hanging over scars of Kosmora, and Ember Lab now sounds much more aware of what players will be coming in for from the first minute. Now, I definitely want to hear from you, so drop a comment and let me know which of these games you're waiting for the most. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like because it really helps the channel. If you're new here and still not subscribed, now's a good time to fix that because on this channel, it's always all about the top and fresh upcoming releases.